Hello, greetings, hello, it's Dr. Thomas Daffern here again to give my weekly talk at the moment on Sundays in opposition to Brexit, coming from a place of love and reason. I've thought this through greatly, and when the referendum took place in 2016 I weighed it all up, and as I've said in these talks, I used logic, reason and heart to come to a strong position for Remain. And I've stayed that, and it's been increasingly obvious that I think that's the correct position. My vote, like many thousands of others, possibly tens or hundreds of thousands, was discounted for inexplicable reasons. And that's one of the reasons I feel so passionately about having a second referendum. Lots of people didn't get to vote in that referendum. The young were excluded, and it's now turned out in this previous week that Vote Leave have now acknowledged they cheated. They've dropped their appeal. It was a criminal offence which Vote Leave did, and the other campaign groups. And we've been told in the courts that if the referendum had been compulsory, strictly enforceable, that it would have been disallowed for this reason. But because it wasn't compulsory and only advisory, therefore it doesn't stand. This is completely illogical reasoning by lawyers and should be appealed. I mean, I wish I had legal training and could lead that charge, because it's so facile, it's just ridiculous. You can't have it both ways. If the referendum was advisory, the point is the government's interpreted as if it was mandatory. And in fact, I noticed this week during the great debate on Wednesday that Theresa May actually said, the words came out of her mouth, this decision in 2016 was mandatory. And nobody in the opposition MPs, interrupted on a point of order and immediately corrected her. I'm a bit sad at the the overall quality of MPs, really, and I repeat that I think they should have to take some kind of licenseship. You shouldn't be allowed to be a parliamentarian in either house unless you've sat some exams to qualify. Most of them have done, obviously, degrees, or a lot of them have done law degrees and practiced sometimes as a lawyer, but I don't think that's sufficient. I've written to the head of the legal profession in England and Wales, and there's no actual ethical barring if you lie in court as a lawyer and get away with it. That's fine if you do it for your client. And I think parliamentarians should do some special kind of exam preparation to it about citizenship, about the constitution, about their duties. The Parliamentary Code of Conduct is very clear. They're not allowed to take bribes or offer them. They have to act with integrity and honesty at all times, and they must always act in the national interest. Now, of course, different MPs from different parties will interpret that differently, but what they cannot do is act flagrantly in their own interest. And I think enough evidence has now come that the Tory party backing Brexit is acting in self-interest. And I think, therefore, sanctions should be applied under the Parliamentary Code of Conduct. And I've been in, I've publicised this fact. I don't know what the opposition MPs are doing, why they haven't actioned that. So we're coming up to another crunch week. Every week seems to be, for crunch time. Last week, the third attempt by Theresa May to get her bill of let's leave, under this deal through failed. And that should be the end of it. That there's no way that bill will get through Parliament unless she literally bribes, targets a number of MPs. The DUP finally have come out and realised it's not in their interests. It's not in the interests of Northern Ireland, actually, to leave, certainly not under that deal. And they've now said they're not going to do anything that will jeopardise the union. Well, they should become a Remain party, like Sinn Féin. Ireland is doing quite well, thank you very much, under the European Union membership, as it gets the best of both worlds. It's part of the United Kingdom, and it's part of the European Union. It has free trade across the whole island. It has free trade with the rest of the UK, Northern Ireland does, and it has influx of tremendous intellectual, brains from all of Europe that come and work in Northern Ireland's universities, Queen's University and all the rest. And there's a great interest in Celtic studies, Irish studies throughout Europe. Why would one want to jeopardise that? And why would one want to do actions that will break up the UK and leave Northern Ireland high and dry and force them into union with the South against the will of the majority of the unionist members of Northern Ireland society, and therefore cause tremendous friction? So I think the light's finally gone on in among the unionists in Northern Ireland. They've realised that they've been backing the wrong horse. They've got to stop backing Theresa May and her crazy Brexit scheme. It's completely against the interests of Ireland, North and South, and from all political persuasions. So I don't think that deal will get through. What we're left with then is debates tomorrow in Parliament on Monday about what are the alternatives. Now, in the votes that took place about that on Thursday, I think it was, the one that won the most number of positive votes, I mean, every option was voted down, but the one that won the most positive votes was for a second referendum. That had the most positive voting in its favour. Also fairly close was the idea of some kind of continuing customs union with European Union sort of almost in but not quite. And that's the preferred option of most of the Labour Party and certainly of Jeremy Corbyn. I'm not quite sure, how he thinks. Let's just imagine that Parliament says, yes, we'll go for the customs union. That means going back to Brussels and the European Union and trying to renegotiate the whole deal. It couldn't be done under this current government. Theresa May would never do that. She doesn't have the intelligence or the sophistication in her diplomacy or the flexibility in her thinking to actually lead such discussions. And therefore, it's simply not feasible, I think. I still think that the solution is to have a second referendum. It's the only logical, fair and moral and politically sensible way out of this dilemma. I personally think that second referendum should be accompanied by a general election on the same day. I think timing is important. I don't think one should have one in front of the other because that's all throws everything up in the air. If there's a general election first, then whoever gets into power can say whatever they want. They can either cancel a referendum or they can swing it in a certain way. They can weight the balloting in a certain way. And, they can play their tricks. Or they could just cancel a referendum and say, no, we're not doing it. I think, therefore, the only fair way out of this for the moral health of the nation is we agree a date, June 21st, where we have a referendum, second referendum, and a general election on the same day. And the parties then have to put their cards on the table. They have to, the law would be that whoever wins the general election has to implement the results of the referendum. And the referendum bill should be phrased in that way. I personally think the referendum should be compulsory. I think every citizen should vote. Every UK citizen, wherever they live in the world, in Europe or New Zealand, if they're a UK passport holder and they've got the right to vote in UK elections, they should. And I also think that for this occasion it should be applied to 16-year-olds and above, because it's their future after all, it's their lives at stake here. That was done in the Scottish independence referendum, and I remember talking to Scottish school kids at the time. They took it very seriously. They were having lessons in school about it. I've been head of citizenship in a number of schools in England, and it's an important subject. It should be taught more, and that's dealing with constitutional history. And this is such an important time. All the school kids of Britain should be on their seats, poised, wanting to vote in this, because it's their lives and future. I would hope most of them would vote Remain. Obviously some wouldn't, and they'll have their reasons. And if I was head of citizenship, I wouldn't be influencing them one way or another. I'd put the facts objectively, which is what I'm trying to do in these talks. If you're a teacher out there listening, you're welcome to use these in schools So anyway, that's my position. A second referendum should be agreed for all 16 and above. I would make it mandatory, actually, so that we get a comprehensive result, not the kind of apathy of, oh, can't we bother to vote type stuff should not be accepted. In Australia, referendums, and in fact I think all voting, are compulsory. If we're going to have an active democracy, we have to vote, we have to take time, and we have to learn about what it is we're voting for, which means better education, better citizenship studies in schools. I mean, to become a British citizen now, you have to take some kind of citizenship classes. And so to be a British citizen, you need that basis of information and education. I was appalled, some of the schools I taught at in England, at the lack of knowledge of even basic geography. Some of these kids, I mean, geography has been dumbed down in a way it doesn't teach actual geography anymore. It teaches, I don't know, something that's not quite geography. And so some of these kids didn't literally know where Scotland was, or Ireland. They didn't have a clue as to the fact that we live in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. They thought we lived in this thing called England. And that's shocking, and that explains the poverty of knowledge which underlies the nationalist English kind of attitude that, oh, we'll do Brexit, and we've done Brexit, and that's enough. The kind of oppositional figures that were rallying, this guy Tommy Robinson, I think he's called, who are coming from a very anti-Muslim, anti-everybody else, anti-immigrants, pro-English nationalism. It's an embarrassment as an English internationalist by cultural origin, although I'm a Canadian citizen living in France. I'm an internationalist, and I've lived in Scotland and Wales, and I love the whole UK. And as an archdruid, I've studied and travelled in many parts of the UK and sat at the feet of many of the great thinkers and so on of modern British history and studied philosophy for years. And I'm embarrassed at the lack of international understanding by that narrow-minded English pro-Brexit vote. It's shameful to me. And yet I understand it because I've taught, people that would uphold those views. And I've tried to counter it with my, educational input as much as possible. And what is education? It's an opening up of the mind to higher horizons, and people that have narrow-minded nationalist views, and you get them in all cultures. You get them in every country. It's often because they literally have never thought outside the box. They've never been outside the valley. In the old days, literally, people didn't travel outside their own valley, so you were, stuck to your own locality. I think those days are gone, and we live in a globalised and beautifully international world of peace, and as an internationalist, I want to see a global world of peace, living in harmony, with all the cultures, continuing. Like you can be from Yorkshire or Cornwall or Wales or North Wales or South Wales or Mid Wales. I lived in Mid Wales, very different to North or South. One's region is important, but nevertheless acknowledge we live in a global ecosphere. And I'm going to come on to that point because my talk here is mainly today about the eco-ethics of why Remain is the most intelligent and moral solution to this dilemma. So I'm looking ahead, I'm saying let's have a second referendum, and then please let's vote Remain. And I'm trying to give arguments for that. I want to start by saying that there are some interesting days to celebrate. And those of you that know my work as a philosopher, when I was teaching in schools, I'd always start with the saint of the day, or the revered sage of the day. And so much so, I published a huge calendar of saints and sages of every religion, and always mark the day in private spiritual practice and intellectual work. And so I'm going to share some of the days that today is significant for. 31st of March. It's the end of the year. We come to 1st of April tomorrow, and enter a new month. Now, the 30th of March, yesterday, in the ancient calendar of the classical era, was a sacred day to Concordia, the goddess of peace, and Pax, which is the origin of the word peace, It was the one day in the calendar, and since I run a peace institute and I'm based here in the European Museum of Peace, obviously this is my goddess, Pax. Pax was an important goddess in Rome, and in every culture you find her equivalent, Irene in Greek. This is the one day of the year when we think about what peace actually means, and she had her own temple in Rome. Augustus founded it, and he built a huge altar which is still extant, showing what peace is. Peace is life, peace is vivacity, peace is farming, peace is scholarship, peace is poetry, peace is love affairs, peace is, children, families, and all the rest of it. And Ovid, to whom we know this from his writing, the Fasti, said that March the 30th is the time to adore Janus, the gentle concord with him, and the Roman Salus, and at the altar of peace, Pax. So it's a very auspicious time. We shouldn't neglect the reverence and worship of peace. Now, whether we are secular in our thinking and say, well, peace is just concord, or whether we are more inclined as a philosopher towards metaphysics and say, no, there's something spiritual about peace, it's transcendental. That's the position of Judaism. Shalom, the concept, is a divinely given gift. The point of the Ten Commandments, the point of the prophetic tradition is to give us that gift of peace. Jerusalem is supposed to be the foundation stone of that divinely sanctioned peace. And may well, I would love that to happen. I've been working for many years to try and get the Golden Gate open in the East Wall of Jerusalem and a peace tent there for all religions. I think it should be a universal symbol of peace. Islam, again, a billion people in the world believe in Islam as a divinely sanctioned revelation through their own prophetic lineage, which is overlapping a lot with the Christian and Muslim ones, that peace is a sanction from the gods, or from Allah, from God and the archangels, to restore mankind to the right path, because we've fallen a bit. We've fallen into the hands of demonic angels, Iblis and his crew, and we've been led astray. And I think that's kind of what's happened with Brexit. I think literally Brexit is a sort of demonic possession at the hands of certain fallen angels. And as a John Dee expert, I'm happy to engage in correspondence as to which particular fallen angels are responsible. But that's my hunch. As the founder of the Mary Magdalene Studies Association, I take exorcism seriously, and I think there's a case for collective exorcism here. My strategy is through knowledge and information and learning. That was Dee's strategy, and it's mine. And, it's the scientific approach. The point is that to restore peace was the goal of Islam. And it's the goal of Christianity. What was Christ doing if not teaching peace and non-violence? And who were his helpers? Well, the angels. In other words, it was a spiritual project he was engaged on. Britain is supposed to be a Christian nation, and I've been baptized into the Christian Church of Britain at the Anglican ceremonies, and I've participated in ceremonies all over the country, from the north of Scotland down to Cornwall and so on. I take that commitment by Christians to peace very, very seriously. It's my life's work, and those of thousands and tens or hundreds of thousands of my friends and colleagues all over the planet. I've worked with peace scholars, of very high order. When I was Secretary General of the World Conference on Religion and Peace, for instance, for many years, and organisations like the Gandhi Foundation, and working through academic peace studies at the University of London and setting up my institute, and so on and so on. This is all driven for me by a deep spiritual commitment to that divinely sanctioned peace. Why is it fractured into different prophetic lineages? Well, the Quran says that's because God planned it. He likes diversity. It was having, he didn't want everybody to be dressed the same, coloured the same, speak the same language. He likes diversity. Okay, that's kind of an explanation that could be unpacked metaphysically, as I'm doing in my commentary on the Quran, which is ongoing, and please listen to it. And my commentary on on the Gospels, and at the moment I'm embarking on the commentary on the letters of St. Paul as well, because Paul is neglected. He's a great sage that inspired the church, and many people are very anti-Paul. Well, let's look at him. He was actually a very profound thinker and a Gnostic, and in the letter I'm working on at the moment, the letter to the Philippians, which is one of Paul's great letters, it's actually the first, anyway, it's somewhere here. The first church in Europe was at Philippi, which is in Macedonia, northern Greece, not far from Mount Athos, just north of there. And it's a fantastic letter. I love it, and I'm explaining it in great detail. He says that we should pray for each other in joy, and that we need to find ways to ward off the kind of negative energy that will be thrown at us as Christians. And the only strength is in love. But then he says a very profound phrase. He says, if you want to find ultimate truth, if you want to persevere, you have to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. It's not easy to be a human being. It's not easy to be, thrown, as Heidegger said, into this world of chaos and confusion. It's not easy to be British at the moment. I know many good, kind-hearted people who genuinely think Brexit is the way forward, because that's all that's been shown to them. And I know, huge numbers of others that realise it's not. And my job as a philosopher and a theologian and teacher is just to point out, the facts, really. As Bertrand Russell said, the most important thing, when he was 80, gave an interview, he said, the most important thing is to go for the facts first. Think clearly and lucidly about the facts. The facts are Brexit is going to destroy the UK, decimate the economy, and leave everybody poorer. That's the facts, I mean, you can't get plainer than that. I think the only kind of reason you would argue in favour of that is if you're into a serious self-destructive trip. And as I explained, that's what cults do. They're death cults that sell destruction and chaos. And I think Steve Bannon and the that dreamed up Brexit belong to those kind of dark, occult, self-destructive cults. They're like kamikaze pilots, they want to smash the system, and if they fail, they're going to self-destruct. With all due respect, this is by any definition, this is evil. This is what evil is. It's self-destructive behaviour that takes other people down with you. That's what Hitler was doing in his World War II megalomania, invading Poland, killing the Jews, you name it, invading Russia. I mean, getting all the young boys from Germany to go and die in Stalingrad. I mean, for what? For his death cult. No, thank you. We don't want to go back down that road. That's why the EU exists. And the fact is, it was created to guarantee Pax and Concordia. So I think that's quite symbolic that we have the Day of Concord just yesterday. Today we have a few other wonderful days, and I want to share a couple of them. Firstly, today, in 1596 was born René Descartes, who's one of my intellectual heroes, a Frenchman, but a universalist like me. He happened to be born in France. I couldn't be born in France. I was born in Montreal, in French Canada. Descartes is a very fascinating figure. I love him because he was a profound philosopher, very well educated. He was from a little village not far from here called Descartes, down towards the Loire, just along from Amboise, where Leonardo da Vinci was. And I will be having a day in honour of Descartes at some point here in this Museum of Peace. And he wanted to know ultimate truth. He felt that we shouldn't take things because we're told them, from whatever authority, out there. Like, I'm the king of Ethiopia, this is how you should pray. No, thank you. I want to work it out from my own reason. And I remember studying Descartes philosophy years ago in Bristol and being struck by his meditations and his intellectual honesty. And he came to the fact of consciousness. He came to his mind mind, and he realised that his mind is not entire unto itself. The mind that we have is part of a bigger mind, which he worked out has to be divine. There has to be a divine consciousness underlying and underwriting all existence, which is what we call God. And so he said that's rationally, if you work it out, that's what has to be the case. The material world, the physical world, you can measure, you can use geometry, and he invented the Cartesian coordinates, which we use in algebra and geometry and all the rest of it. And he invented other things, a great mathematician, but he knew that you can't mathematize God. That's something different. The supernatural, he sort of put it on a different plane. He said they hinge through the human mind. We seem to have access to both worlds, the physical, measurable world, and the supernatural, divine world. We seem to be the hinge being. And anyway, his life journey took him around Europe. He spent time it was a time of tragedy, it was a time of conflict, the Great 30 Years' War, as it's called, tragic conflict between Protestants and Catholics, that my hero, King James, had tried to stop. And any right-thinking person was trying to stop this conflict, but fanatics on all sides were just going for it. And a third of Germany's population were killed, villages were decimated, fields laid waste, animals killed. It was a nightmare. Peter Watson, a great historian, has written a book about this, calls it Europe's Great Tragedy. It was the worst war in Europe before World War One. And it was all over a ridiculous, mistake, because the simple intellectual response is we should be both Protestant and Catholic at the same time. Fiercely, truly, and loyally so. And I've explained before how that works, is a Catholic is someone that wants universal truth, like Descartes, or countless others, or the greatest saints of the Catholic heritage, or the great thinkers and artists like Leonardo, or the musicians like Haydn, who we celebrate also on this day, because Haydn was also born on this day in 1732. I'll come to him a bit later. So we celebrate that universalism, but at the same time we should protest against injustice and evil and ignorance and foolishness and so on. I mean, that should be also our duty. So the mistake was not actually educating Luther enough. His line manager in Rome, Cardinal Egidio de Viterbo, should have taken Luther aside and given him some more deep instruction in philosophy. And Egidio was too busy talking to angels and translating the Kabbalah into Latin. And the rabbi who was working with Cardinal Egidio was a direct ancestor of David Cameron, the Prime Minister who got us into this Brexit mess. It's fascinating to watch karmic history unfold. And we have to weave through our study of transpersonal history a harmony. I'm a devotee of the goddess of harmony and peace and concord. And so was Descartes, who I salute this day. Although he was a Catholic, he ended up working for Protestants, and he ended up advising the Queen of Sweden, Queen Christina, a great, great scholar in her own right and a great queen, whose father had won the 30 Years' War for the Protestants. But, when you win a war, you can't, slaughter everybody. So they had to make a peace. In 1848, the Peace of Westphalia, which laid the foundations of the modern European peace system, which has just been celebrated, is one of the underpinnings of the international legal order that made the European Union possible. That we don't slaughter each other, we respect each other's right to be different. So in the European Union we have France, largely Catholic state, but secular technically. We also have Sweden, a largely Protestant state. We have Austria, we have Spain, we have Germany. And, you don't have to be of a particular religion, just as in the Peace of Westphalia, the right for each state to determine its own religion was guaranteed. So some chose to be Protestant, some Catholic. And, that was excellent. So Descartes unfortunately died in Sweden, in Stockholm. He caught a chill. He was having to get up too early. He didn't do mornings, I don't think. He had to get up at like 5 in the morning for an hour's tutorial. And it killed him, having to get up in those freezing dawns in Stockholm. Can you imagine a fate worse than death? Poor chap should have been allowed to stay in bed and give her evening classes. Unfortunately, she killed him off. But then I think in a fit of pique and guilt, Queen Christina herself surrendered the throne and converted to Catholicism, bless her. And went to Rome and threw her life into esoteric study like all of us should. I mean, what's the throne here or there? Just give it up. You know, I think Elizabeth should abdicate and resign and go to Rome and spend her last few years of study and profound, meditation on the folly of human false desires. She could do a Christina, but that would be something, wouldn't it? Anyway, we also celebrate on this day. So I'm using Descartes. I'm saying, look, his day is today, 31st of March. He's why I like Europe. Thinkers of that stature, they're polymaths, they travel about, they're both Catholic and Protestant at the same time. They're not narrow-minded. And he inspired the whole scientific enlightenment, the rationalist tradition of philosophy, which I come from, that we have the right and the duty to think through life's puzzles intellectually. It was the fountainhead of, the later work of all the great European philosophers, Sartre and Heidegger and Jaspers and, all the deep thinkers, Kierkegaard, Hegel, Kant. They all looked on Descartes as one of their founders. And, he was a martyr for philosophical reason. And he didn't write too much about politics. I mean, there is a bit more about Descartes that's come to light recently, which I think makes him even more human, bless him. Although he was a French Catholic, he found that to say what he was saying, because it was so ahead of its time, right? He was saying we could actually think through reality and had a duty to. He ended up living in Holland, because in Holland there was a tremendous intellectual liberty, which is why I love Holland myself and the Netherlands, and the freedom of thought that also led to Spinoza. Spinoza was around at the same time. Descartes went to Holland, and that's where he published his first works. And he had a love affair. He lived in the home of an English bookseller. This is a great story, it'd make a superb movie. It's been written up as a novel by a brilliant novelist. I love that book. He went to live in the house of a bookseller who was called Thomas, an Englishman, bless him. And when he was in that house in Amsterdam, he fell in love with the lady of the house, the maid who was working there. She must have been very beautiful and, sexy and all the rest of it. And Descartes was just like a normal, full-blooded Frenchman. They had an affair and fell in love. It was a proper, deep love affair. She loved his teaching and ideas and dashing Frenchman, and he loved her. She was a beautiful Dutch girl. To me, that's a symbol of what Europe's about. We should be having love affairs across these boundaries. That's how life celebrates itself, right? Anyway, it ended a bit sadly because they had a daughter, and she left that employment. Descartes set her up in a cottage somewhere on the coast, and they kept the relationship going. But sadly, the daughter died at the age of about 5. And I think it broke Descartes' heart. He should have married her, obviously, but, for reasons that historians can mull over. And they're just starting to study all this, because this has all just been coming out recently. Descartes, the great rationalist, secretly was a man of passion, which is very interesting. Anyway, apparently it broke his heart, and from then on his philosophy got deeper. His love affair with this Dutch girl, and she then married